8 years ago, my son brought me up here and shut the door to the world. Today, he came back and froze before a new door, one that I had opened myself. My secret isn't made of silver or gold, it's forged from tears, sweat, and long, lonely nights. He looks at me as if I'm a stranger, and perhaps I am. The mother he knew died the day he drove away. Can a person truly be reborn from the ashes of an old life and become stronger than ever before? Welcome to our channel, Deepu Kader Stories. If this story touches your heart, please hit the like button, subscribe, and leave us a comment letting us know what city you're watching from. The Freeze. My name is Florence Cole. I am 74 years old, and 8 years ago, my son, Matthew, sent me here, to this cabin on Blackwood Mountain, to be forgotten. He did not expect me to survive. He certainly did not expect me to thrive, and he definitely did not expect what he is seeing right now. Standing frozen on my doorstep like a ghost caught in the headlights. The air up here is thin and cold in early winter. It bites at any exposed skin. I can see the chill creeping into him. See it in the way his shoulders are slumped inside a coat that looks too thin. Too city. It's a fine coat, I'm sure. Expensive. But it offers no defense against this kind of cold. The mountain's cold. A cold that gets into your bones. He's been standing there for a full minute now. Not moving, just staring. His eyes aren't on me. Not really. They're darting past me, into the warmth of the cabin behind me. I can almost see what he sees. The warm glow from the stone fireplace, the long, handcrafted wooden table where my friends and I shared a meal just an hour ago. The faint sound of Alara's laughter still seems to hang in the air, mixed with the scent of pine and cinnamon. He expected silence. He expected decay. He expected a frail old woman waiting for the end. He did not expect the sound of life. I watch him. I don't speak. There is nothing to say yet. The years have taught me the power of silence. It is a language all its own. His silence is born of shock. Mine is born of peace. The flicker of disbelief in his eyes is plain as day. The slight tremor in his hand. He looks older than his 48 years. Tired. The city has worn him down to a nub. Finally, his eyes meet mine. They are Richard's eyes. My late husband's. It's the one thing about him that still makes my heart ache. Just a little. A sharp, quick pang. Like a needle prick. Mom, he says. His voice is a croak. A dry, scratchy thing. I simply nod. I make no move to hug him. I make no move to invite him in. The porch boards are cold beneath my feet. But I don't feel them. Matthew, I say. My voice is steady. Even, it sounds like my own. It hasn't always. He takes a clumsy step forward. Then another. He stops just before the doorway, peering inside as if afraid of what he might find. He sees the shelves lined with jars of preserves, their colors like jewels in the firelight. He sees the hand-thrown pottery mugs drying by the hearth. He sees the thick, hand-woven blankets draped over the chairs. This is not the cabin he left me in. That cabin was a husk. This one is a home. I step aside. A simple gesture. It is an invitation, but not a welcome. He hesitates, then shuffles inside, bringing the scent of gasoline and city rain with him. He stands awkwardly in the middle of the room, turning slowly, taking it all in. The expanded kitchen, the sturdy workshop visible through a newly added doorway, a warm light spilling from it. He looks lost, a stranger in a place he thought he knew. I close the door, shutting out the cold. The latch clicks shut, a sound of finality. I walk over to the stove, where the kettle is still warm. I pick up two of Alara's mugs, the earthy brown ones with the slight imperfections that make them beautiful. I pour the hot water over the chamomile I gathered from the South Ridge. I don't ask him if he wants any. I just make it. Actions have become easier than words. I place one mug on the table in front of him. He flinches, as if my simple movement startled him. He looks down at the steam rising from the clay. He looks at my hands. They are not the soft hands of the mother he remembers. They are gardener's hands, a potter's hands, strong, gnarled, capable. He finally sits, his body sinking into the chair as if his strings have been cut. He looks utterly defeated. I take my seat across from him. The silence stretches between us, thick and heavy as a wool blanket. I look at the mug in my hands. There's a fine crack running down the side. A place where the glaze settled just so in the kiln. Alara had wanted to discard it. I told her no. I liked it. I traced the crack with my finger. And then I look at my son. You know, Matthew, I say, and my voice is quiet. Even some things, once broken, don't mend back the same way. They become something else entirely. Stronger, perhaps. Or just different. He looks up at me then, and in his eyes, I see the first crack in the man he has become. I see the little boy who once ran to me with a scraped knee. Lost and looking for a comfort I no longer know how to give, I just take a sip of my tea, and I wait. The gentle deception. That silence in the cabin now, it reminds me of the silence in his house 8 years ago. But they are two different kinds. Here, the silence is peaceful, full of the mountain's quiet breathing. Back then, the silence was heavy. It was a weighted blanket, thick with the smell of stale coffee and unspoken arguments. It was the kind of quiet that presses down on you, making it hard to breathe. I was a ghost in that house, a quiet shadow that moved from the small guest room to the kitchen and back again. I knew my place. I would wake before the sun, make the coffee, and then retreat to my room until I heard the front door close as they left for work. I learned the art of being invisible. I folded myself up small, so as not to take up too much space in their big, shiny lives. But even a ghost sees things. I saw the letters, the ones with the red ink stamped on the front, peeking out from the pile of glossy catalogs. They would disappear quickly, usually before Matthew came home. I saw the way Hannah's smile never quite reached her eyes, the way she would hold her phone so I couldn't see the screen. I learned to read the tension in the set of Matthew's jaw when he thought I wasn't looking. It was the same look his father used to get when the bills were piling up. A tight, brittle look. I heard things, too. Whispers, sharp and fast, from behind their closed bedroom door. I couldn't make out the words. Not usually. Just the hiss of them. Words like numbers, and extension, and no other choice. Once, I walked into the kitchen and they fell silent so suddenly it was like a slap. They both jumped, startled, as if I had caught them in a crime. They were just standing by the counter, but their guilt hung in the air, thick as smoke. I never asked. What was there to ask? I knew the answers would be lies. And I suppose, deep down, I didn't want to hear them. I was tired, not just the kind of tired that sleep can fix. A deeper tired. A weariness in my bones from a lifetime of trying to hold things together. The conversation, when it came, was on a Sunday. It was the only day they were both home, though they spent most of it on their laptops. Hannah had made a point of making tea, using the good china. A performance. It was always a performance with Hannah. She sat across from me at the polished dining table, a table I was never invited to eat at. Florence, she began, her voice dripping with a practiced sweetness. Matthew and I have been talking. We've been worried about you. Matthew, sitting beside her, nodded. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder, the city air. Mom, it's not good for you. All the noise. The pollution. It's a lot. We were thinking, Hannah continued, placing her hand over his. A gesture of unity, of a decision already made. Remember the cabin, Richard's old place on the mountain? It's so peaceful up there. The clean air, the quiet. It would be like a long vacation. A place for you to rest. To recharge. Rest. The word hung in the air between us. I knew they didn't mean rest. They meant removal. We're planning on doing some renovations here, Matthew added, his voice a little too quick. A lot of dust. Noise. It wouldn't be comfortable for you. We could drive you up next weekend. Get you settled in. We'll come visit all the time. Of course. Of course. I looked from my son's averted eyes to my daughter-in-law's bright, false smile. I saw the whole thing laid out before me. The inconvenient old mother. The financial troubles they were hiding. The house that was probably worth a lot of money without me in it. It was all there, in the space between their carefully chosen words, and in that moment, I could have fought. I could have cried. I could have demanded the truth. The old Florence, the one who raised him, she would have tried to fix it, to sacrifice a little more of herself to patch the cracks in their lives. But she was gone. She had faded away in the silent hallways of their big, empty house, so I just nodded. I looked at the teacup in my hands, its delicate handle cold against my fingers. I saw my reflection warped in the polished silver spoon next to it. A distorted, tired old woman. I didn't fight. Perhaps I was too tired. Or perhaps a small, quiet part of me saw the open door and chose to walk through it. I saw an escape from the unspoken arguments, from the weight of their silence. Maybe they thought they were getting rid of a burden. But in a strange way, I felt like they were setting me free. That sounds nice, I said, and the lie was so gentle, so quiet. It was almost the truth. The inheritance of whispers. That first winter on the mountain was the hardest. The silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was a physical weight. It pressed down on me during the day and smothered me at night. The cold wasn't just in the air, it seeped up from the floorboards. A damp, persistent chill that no amount of firewood seemed to vanquish. Some nights, I would wake up, my heart pounding, convinced I'd heard a car on the dirt road, convinced it was Matthew, come to take me back. But there was only the sound of the wind sighing through the pines, a lonely, mournful sound. I spent my days in a haze. I unpacked the few boxes they'd packed for me. My clothes, a handful of books, the old cast iron skillet that had been my mother's. I tried to clean, but the dust felt ancient, settled, and I felt just as settled, just as forgotten. I was a piece of furniture left behind in an empty house. Waiting. For what? I didn't know. There were days I didn't speak a single word aloud. My own voice began to feel foreign in my throat. I would sit by the window for hours, watching the squirrels chase each other, watching the snow fall, and I would feel a profound nothingness. It was a dangerous feeling. It was the feeling of giving up. After a month, maybe two, the days blurred together. I found myself at my lowest. It was a particularly cold night. The fire had dwindled to embers, and I didn't have the strength to put another log on. I was wrapped in a thin blanket. It's shivering. And the loneliness was so immense, it felt like another person in the room with me. A cold, unwelcome guest. I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. I will simply fade away. It was then that my eyes fell on the last box, tucked away under the rickety bed, a small wooden chest. It had been Richard's. It held his personal thing, the few items I couldn't bear to part with after he passed. I hadn't opened it in over a decade. It felt too final, like closing a door for good. But that night, the thought of it was a small flicker of warmth in the cold emptiness. My hands were stiff as I dragged it out. The hinges creaked in protest. Inside, on top of a folded wool sweater that still smelled faintly of him, was a stack of leather-bound journals. I had forgotten about them. Richard was a quiet man, but he was a writer. He wrote things down. His thoughts, his plans, his dreams. My fingers trembled as I picked up the first one. I blew a layer of dust from the cover. I opened it to a random page. His handwriting, a strong, neat script, filled the page, and I began to read. It wasn't just a journal. It was a blueprint. It was a confession. It was the secret heart of the man I had loved for 40 years. He wrote about his weariness with the city, with his job at the drafting firm. He called it a cage of straight lines. He wrote about the mountain, this very cabin. He hadn't bought it as a weekend getaway, as I'd always believed. He had bought it as an escape, a future. He had a dream, a quiet, humble dream. He wanted to build a life here, not just for us, but for others like him, people who felt lost in the noise. He had sketched out plans for a workshop. He had lists of names, people he'd met in the nearby town. A woodworker named Samuel, whose hands could make oak bend and sing. A family of potters, the Averys, who knew the secrets of the local clay. He wrote about creating a place where people could work with their hands, create things of beauty and purpose, a community, a sanctuary. I read for hours. I read until the sun began to filter through the dusty window panes. My tears fell onto the old pages. smudging the ink. They were not tears of sorrow for myself. They were tears for him, for the dream he never got to live. For the man I realized I had only partly known. In one of his last entries, just before the sickness took him, he had written, "Florence thinks I'm just a practical man, but I have this vision, a hearth, a fire that warms more than one house, a place where the worth of a person is in the skill of their hands and the kindness in their heart, not the numbers in a ledger. I want to build that, for her, for us, a life that is true." I closed the journal and held it to my chest. The cold in the room was still there, but the cold inside of me, it was gone, replaced by a slow, burning warmth. It was the ember of his dream, and it had just found new breath in me. I looked around the dusty, silent cabin. I saw it then, not as my prison, but as his legacy, as my starting point. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with his whispers, his plans, his hopes. That night, I wasn't Florence Cole, the forgotten mother. I was Florence Cole, Richard's wife, and I had a promise to keep. Richard's dream became my blueprint for a new life. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, what forgotten dreams are hiding in your own past, waiting for you to give them a second chance. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Mountain Hearth. A promise to a ghost is a powerful thing. It settled into my bones and gave my hands a purpose again. I started with Richard's list, a list of names, some with little notes beside them. Samuel, knows red oak like the back of his hand. The Miller family, M-U-T, best blueberry patch on the west slope. It was a map, not of a place, but of people. The first door I knocked on belonged to Samuel Hayes. I found him living in a small, tidy house that smelled of dust and old memories. He was a stooped man with hands the size of dinner plates. Hands that now lay limp in his lap. Richard's note hadn't mentioned that Samuel's wife, Clara, had passed away 2 years prior. His workshop, a fine structure Richard himself had helped build, stood silent in the backyard, a thick layer of dust covering every surface. I didn't come asking for anything. I just came with a jar of my wild blackberry jam. Using a recipe I had found in Richard's notes, I sat with him on his porch, and we talked. About the weather, about the changing seasons, about Richard. I told him about the dream I'd found tucked away in those notebooks. He was a dreamer, that man, Samuel said, his voice raspy from disuse. He stared at his silent workshop. "I haven't picked up a tool since Clara. Just don't have the heart for it." I just nodded. I came back the next week, this time with a warm loaf of honey oat bread. We sat on the porch again. I didn't mention the workshop, but as I was leaving, I said, "Samuel, my kitchen table wobbles. The one Richard made. I think a leg is loose. I don't suppose you'd know how to fix it." He was quiet for a long time. Then he sighed. A deep, heavy sound. "Leave it on the porch," he grumbled. "I'll take a look." The next week, my table was fixed, solid as a rock, and when I went to thank him, the door to his workshop was open. Just a crack. A sliver of light was cutting through the dust. It was a start. My next visit was to a young woman named Elara Vance. Her grandmother was on Richard's list. Elara had inherited her grandmother's kiln and a talent for pottery. But she was shy, selling just enough at the farmer's market to get by. She had fire in her soul, but she kept it banked low. I saw her work. It was beautiful, strong and earthy, like the mountain itself. But she was trying to make what she thought tourists wanted, little trinkets, brightly colored and flimsy. I bought one of her simple, unadorned mugs. The next time I saw her, I brought her a slice of apple cake served on one of her own simple, unadorned plates. "This," I said, pointing to the plate, "this is who you are. This has heart. The other things, they're just souvenirs." She looked at me, her eyes wide. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Slowly, one by one, a small circle began to form. Me, with Richard's recipes and a quiet determination. Samuel, who started spending more time in his workshop than in his house. The sound of his sanding, a gentle rhythm on the mountain air. Elara, who began crafting pottery that felt true, her hands covered in the rich, dark clay of the riverbed. We were a strange collection of lonely souls, a retired woodworker, a shy artist, and a forgotten mother. We started working together in my cabin. At first, it was clumsy. My first batch of spiced apple butter, cooked on the old wood stove, burned to the bottom of the pan. Samuel's first batch of hand-carved spoons were a little rough. Alara broke 3 bowls in a single firing. There were days we looked at our meager collection of goods and wondered what on earth we were doing, but we kept at it. We learned. We started selling a few things at the market in the valley. A jar of jam here, a set of coasters there. The first time someone bought one of Alara's big, beautiful serving bowls, the smile on her face was brighter than any glaze. That $50 bill felt more real, more earned, than any money I had ever known. One cold evening, as we sat around my wobbly old table, the one Samuel had yet to fix, sharing a simple stew, Alara looked into the fireplace. The flames were dancing, casting a warm, flickering light on our faces. "This place," she said softly, "this cabin, it's like the hearth, the heart of everything." Samuel grunted in agreement. "A mountain hearth." And just like that, we had a name, Mountain Hearth. It wasn't just a brand, it was what we were. A small fire, burning brightly on a cold mountain, keeping each other warm. I would often pause in the middle of a busy day. The kitchen smelling of simmering fruit and spices. The sound of Samuel's saw buzzing in the new workshop we built. Alara humming by her wheel, and I would think of the silence in Matthew's house. That sterile, heavy quiet. A home where every surface gleamed but nothing had any warmth. Here, there was flour on the floor and wood shavings on the porch steps. There was life. There was noise. The beautiful, chaotic, wonderful noise of creation, of a family, not of blood, but of purpose. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I was richer than my son had ever been. The Unraveling. We sat there, in that heavy silence, for what felt like a lifetime. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the nervous tap of Matthew's finger against his untouched mug. He wouldn't look at me. He stared into the depths of his tea as if it held all the answers he didn't have. I just watched him. I watched the confident slope of his shoulders, the one he inherited from Richard, slowly begin to curve inward, collapsing under a weight I could not see. Finally, he took a shuddering breath. The sound was ragged, torn. The company went under. He said to the table. Not to me. 6 months ago, it all fell apart. I didn't say anything. I just took another sip of my tea. The chamomile was warm, soothing. A small point of calm in the storm that was gathering in my small cabin. He looked up then, his eyes pleading. They were bloodshot, desperate. We lost everything. Mom, the investments, the market. It was a bad bet. A series of bad bets. He let out a dry, humorless laugh that sounded more like a sob. Hannah, she left, took the kids, moved in with her sister in Oregon. She said she couldn't live with a failure. A failure. The word hung in the air between us. Sharp and ugly. I watched a moth flutter against the window pane, drawn to the light, bumping against the glass again and again, trying to get to a warmth it could see but never reach. I'm sorry to hear that. Matthew, I said. My voice was even. I was surprised at how even it was. That was what broke him. My calm, my quiet. It was not the reaction he had prepared for. He needed anger. He needed tears. He needed something to fight against. He didn't know what to do with my stillness. His composure finally crumbled. The carefully constructed walls he had lived behind for years came tumbling down. We sold it. Mom, he whispered. The words were a torrent now, tumbling out of him. Unstoppable. We sold the house, the one I grew up in, your home. He finally looked at me, his face a mask of anguish. We sold it right after you left. I held his gaze. I did not flinch. I did not gasp. I just held his gaze and let him speak. Let the poison finally come out. We told ourselves it was for the best. He rushed on, the words tripping over each other. We told everyone you'd decided to retire to the mountains permanently, that you wanted a simpler life. We needed the capital, just a little boost. We said, to secure our future. to build something for the kids. He buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, but we didn't build anything. We just spent it. On a bigger house, a better car, on appearances. We built a life on a lie. Mom. A life built on selling my own mother's home right out from under her. He let his hands fall, and his face was wet with tears. He looked like a little boy again. Lost. Terrified. A child who had broken something precious and didn't know how to fix it. He waited. He waited for my judgment, for my fury, for the condemnation he so clearly felt he deserved. I didn't give it to him. Slowly, I stood up. My chair scraped softly against the wooden floor. I walked over to the window. Turning my back on him, I looked out at the darkness. The moon was high, casting long, skeletal shadows from the pine trees. The world outside was so peaceful, so unforgivingly honest in its beauty. It did not care for our small, human dramas, our ugly little secrets. I could feel his eyes on my back. I could feel his desperation radiating across the room. He was holding his breath. The entire world seemed to be holding its breath. After a long moment, I turned back around. I walked back to the table, but I didn't sit. I just stood there, looking down at my son, my only child. And then, I asked him the question that had been sitting silently in my heart for 8 long years. My voice was not angry. It was not sad. It was just quiet, terribly quiet. And all this time, I said, letting the words hang in the still air, you thought I didn't know. The weight of knowing. The sound of his own confession hung in the air between us. Thick and suffocating, he looked at me, his eyes pleading, expecting, I don't know what, tears, anger, some loud explosion of grief that would let him feel the comfort of being forgiven. He was waiting for me to play my part, the wounded mother, but I was no longer playing a part. My role in that play had ended 8 years ago. I watched a moth flutter against the window pane, its wings making a soft, desperate tapping sound. It wanted the light inside. It didn't understand the glass was in the way. You thought I didn't know, I repeated. My voice was flat. A simple statement of fact, not an accusation. Color drained from his face. It was one thing to confess to a victim. It was another thing entirely to confess to a witness. How? He stammered. How could you get careless when you think no one is watching? I said, my gaze still on the moth. You think the old woman in the guest room doesn't see, doesn't hear? I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth was sharp enough on its own. The week before I left, I began. My voice even. Methodical. A letter came. It was in a long white envelope with a clear window. From a foreclosure agency. I saw it in the kitchen trash, tucked under some coffee grounds. You must have missed the shredder that morning. He flinched. A small, almost imperceptible movement. And, Hannah, I continued. She loved that pearl necklace of my mother's, the one Richard gave me. And I gave to her on your wedding day. She always wore it for special occasions. But 2 days before our little talk about my vacation, I heard her on the phone in the hallway. She was talking to someone from a pawn shop, describing it. Wait. Clarity. The clasp. I went to her jewelry box that afternoon. While she was out, it was gone. Matthew just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The shock on his face was absolute. He had constructed a whole story around my ignorance, my naivety. He had built his freedom on the foundation of my weakness. To discover that the foundation was sand, it undid him. I could have confronted you, I said, finally turning my eyes from the window to look at him. They felt heavy in my head. I could have screamed. I could have thrown that foreclosure notice on the dining room table and demanded you tell me why my son was a liar. I paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room. But what was there to say? Matthew, to watch my only son lie to my face, to see the panic in your eyes as you tried to build another lie on top of the first one? No. I chose to preserve the memory of the boy I raised, the one who believed in honesty, rather than confront the man you had become. Leaving was my final act of mothering. I was letting you go. He made a small, choked sound, the sound of a man drowning. Every excuse, every justification he had built up over 8 years was being dismantled, piece by piece, not with anger, but with cold. Hard facts. He had no defense. There was nothing to fight against, only the quiet, unwavering weight of my knowing. I had carried that knowledge alone for 8 years. Up the mountain, through the lonely winters, into the warmth of this new life. It was a heavy thing to carry, but it was mine. It kept me from ever looking back. It kept me from ever waiting for the phone to ring. I knew the truth. And the truth, as they say, sets you free. It just doesn't tell you how painful that freedom can be at first. He sat there, utterly broken. A stranger in his mother's house. Stripped bare not by my rage, but by my memory. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace. Adding another log to the embers, the wood hissed and popped, catching fire. So you see, I said, my back to him. You didn't send me away. You just opened the door. I turned around and looked at him. A hollowed-out man sitting in a room filled with a life he had no part in. The question is, Matthew, what did you think you would find when you came back? A different kind of richness. The silence that followed my question was a different kind of silence. It was no longer thick with tension. It was hollow, empty. All the air had been sucked out of the room. And out of my son, he just sat there, a ghost at his own mother's table, looking at a woman he did not know, a woman who had seen right through him. We might have sat there forever, but the mountain had other plans. A sharp, cheerful knock echoed from the front door. Rap, 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 rap. Quick and full of energy. Matthew jumped, his head snapping up, his whole body tense like a cornered animal. I just sighed, a slow release of breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The outside world had arrived. Come on in. Elara. It's open. I called out. The door swung open, and a blast of cold air swirled in, carrying with it a young woman with cheeks pink from the wind and eyes bright with life. This was Elara. Her hands, as always, were dusted with a fine layer of dried, gray clay. She held a shallow bowl in them like a treasure. Florence, you have to see it, she began, her voice bubbling with excitement. She stopped short when she saw Matthew. She gave him a quick, polite nod, the kind you give a stranger, before turning her full attention back to me. The drama in the room was invisible to her. She only saw the work. The robin's egg glaze finally came out right, she said, placing the bowl in my hands. It was beautiful, still slightly warm from the kiln. It had a good weight to it, solid, real. The folks at the little mercantile in Asheville want a dozen. Can you believe it? I can believe it, I said, turning the bowl over in my hands. I ran my thumb over the smooth surface. This is good work. Elara, honest work. We talked for a few minutes. We talked about clay consistency and firing temperatures, and how Samuel had finally fixed the wobbly leg on her potting wheel. It was a simple conversation. A conversation about making things. Matthew just sat there, listening. His world of stocks and ledgers and hostile takeovers was a million miles away. He was an anchor from a different ship, dropped into foreign waters. He didn't understand the language we were speaking. Well, I've got to run, Elara finally said, pulling her coat tighter. Big night tonight. Samuel's bringing his venison stew for dinner. Don't you be late. I wouldn't miss it. I smiled. She waved and was gone, leaving behind a gust of cold air and the clean, earthy smell of clay. The silence that returned was different. It was no longer my silence, or Matthew's. It was just an awkward space between two strangers. I looked at him. He seemed smaller somehow. You should stay, I said. It wasn't a question. There's always enough. He didn't answer, just gave a weak, helpless nod. An hour later, the cabin was filled with life. The long wooden table was crowded. Samuel, a giant of a man with a white beard and hands as gnarled as oak roots, ladled out thick, fragrant stew. Elara was laughing, telling a story about a clumsy tourist who'd mistaken her for a park ranger. The Avery twins were arguing good-naturedly over who was better at carving spoons. Matthew sat at the far end of the table. He ate in silence. He watched. I saw him watching Samuel's hands as the old man broke a piece of fresh-baked bread. Hands that had built half the furniture in this room. Calloused, scarred, but gentle hands. I remembered Matthew's hands. Smooth, manicured, hands that signed papers and tapped on keyboards. Hands that had signed away his own home. I saw him watching Alara as she took a bowl of stew. Her face lit with simple joy. I remembered Hannah. Her joy was always attached to a price tag. A new car, a bigger house, a diamond bracelet. It was a joy that was always hungry. Never satisfied, he saw us share food from common bowls, passing plates with easy familiarity. I remembered the last Thanksgiving I'd spent at his house. The cold, formal dining room, the porcelain plates that were never touched by another's hands, the silence, so different from this companionable chatter. At one point, Samuel told a funny story about Richard from years ago, a story about a fishing trip and a legendary trout that got away. I started to laugh, a real laugh, a deep, from the belly laugh that shook my shoulders. I hadn't laughed like that in years. I caught Matthew's eye from across the table. He was staring at me, not with anger or shame, but with a look of profound and utter confusion, as if he was seeing a complete stranger, and I realized, in that moment, he had never known this Florence, the one who could laugh like this, the one who was happy, watching my son watch my new life. I realized he was the one who was truly poor. He had everything, and yet he had nothing. It is a strange thing. This journey, it strips you bare, and then shows you what you are truly made of. If you are still listening, please do me a favor and comment true below, so I know that I still have friends walking this path with me. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to tell the final part of this story, the part where I must decide if a bridge, once burned, can ever be rebuilt. The father's ghost. The last dish was dried and put away. The sounds of our friends' departing cars faded down the mountain road, leaving behind a profound quiet. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing orange embers, pulsing softly in the dim light. The tension from before dinner had dissolved, replaced by something heavier, something unspoken. Matthew sat at the table, staring into the empty mug Alara had left behind. He hadn't said more than a few words all evening, just watched and listened. A ghost at the feast of a life he had no part in. "Come," I said, my voice soft in the quiet room. "There's something else you should see." He followed me without a word. I didn't lead him to the guest room or the porch. I led him through the door he had stared at when he first arrived, the one that led to the workshop. I flicked on the light. It wasn't a harsh, fluorescent glare, but a series of warm, low-hanging lamps that cast a gentle glow over the room. The air inside smelled of sawdust and linseed oil and damp earth. It smelled of work, honest work. It was Richard's dream, brought to life. The long workbench, built by Samuel from a single slab of red oak, was smooth and scarred with the marks of creation. Tools hung neatly on the walls, each in its proper place, just as Richard had drawn them in his sketches. Shelves were filled with blocks of uncut wood, bags of clay, and Samuel's half-finished projects, a child's rocking horse, a set of intricate cabinetry doors. It was a space of possibility, a sanctuary. On the far wall, above a small drafting table, hung a single, framed photograph. It was of Richard, taken years ago, right here on this mountain. He was younger, his hair still dark, but his eyes were the same. He was leaning against a tall pine, squinting into the sun, a rare, genuine smile on his face. He looked free. Matthew stopped in the middle of the room. His gaze went from the tools to the workbench, and finally, to the photograph of his father. He just stood there, taking it all in. "You remember your father," I said. It wasn't a question. "You remember him in a suit. You remember him tired, coming home late, smelling of the city. You remember him quiet at the dinner table, his mind 1,000 miles away." Matthew nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the picture. That was the man the world required him to be. I continued, my voice feeling thick with memories. But this, I gestured around the workshop. This was the man he was, the man he wanted to be. I walked over to the drafting table and picked up one of Richard's old leather-bound notebooks, the one I had found all those years ago. Its pages were soft and worn from his hand. He hated his job. "Matthew, did you ever know that he hated the endless meetings? the numbers on a page that didn't mean anything, the feeling that he was just a cog in a giant, heartless machine. He felt like he was suffocating. I opened the notebook to a marked page. He bought this land with a small inheritance from his uncle. A secret. He would come up here on weekends, sometimes telling me he was on a business trip. He wasn't having an affair. He was having an affair with a life he couldn't have. I watched my son's shoulders begin to shake. This workshop, this was his escape plan. He drew every inch of it. He wanted to build a place where things were made slowly, with care. He wanted a life where he could feel the grain of the wood under his hand. He wanted you to know that feeling. The feeling of creating something real. Matthew, not just chasing numbers on a screen. I saw a single tear trace a path through the grime on his cheek. The week he died, the week of the heart attack, he was going to tell me. My voice trembled. Just for a moment. He was going to quit his job. He was going to sell the house in the city. He was going to move us up here. All of us. He was finally ready to choose this life. He just ran out of time. That's when it happened. A sound broke from Matthew's chest. It was a raw, guttural, sobby age. The kind a man only makes when everything he thought was true falls away. He stumbled forward, bracing himself on the smooth, scarred surface of the workbench. His legs gave out, and he slid to his knees. He wasn't just crying for the mother he had wronged. He was crying for the father he had never known, for the dream he had never understood. He was crying for the empty, hollow man he had become, a pale imitation of the man his father had desperately tried not to be. He was crying for a life of wrong turns. I walked over to him. He was kneeling on the floor, his head bowed, his body shaking with the force of a grief that had been buried for a lifetime. I didn't say, "It's okay." It wasn't okay. I didn't hug him. The space between us was still too wide for that. I just placed my hand on his trembling shoulder, a simple touch. It was all I had to give, a silent acknowledgement of his pain, and of mine. And, for a long moment, we stayed like that, the ghost of his father watching over us, in the quiet sanctuary built from a forgotten dream. The choice. The next morning, the world was quiet. A fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, blanketing everything in a soft, forgiving white. It muffled all sound, absorbing the echoes of the previous night's storm. It felt like the mountain was holding its breath, waiting. I was up before dawn. As always, the habit was ingrained in me now. A rhythm set by the sun, not an alarm clock. I had the fire going. The low crackle of pine, a comforting heartbeat in the stillness. The rich, dark scent of coffee was just beginning to fill the cabin when Matthew finally emerged from the small guest room. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man testing the ground beneath his feet after a great fall. He looked different. The storm inside him had passed. What was left was a quiet stillness, a hollowness that seemed to have been scrubbed clean. He had slept in a borrowed flannel shirt of Samuel's. It was too big for him, hanging loose on his frame, making him seem younger, less substantial, for the first time in a very long time. He looked like a boy, not my boy, with his tailored suits and confident stride, just a boy, lost and weary. He didn't speak. He just took the heavy pottery mug of coffee I offered him and sat at the long wooden table. He cradled it in his hands as if for warmth, though the cabin was already growing comfortable. We sat in silence, two solitary figures in the growing light, watching the sun slowly rise, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of pale pink and gold. It was a peaceful silence, not the heavy, suffocating kind from the night before, filled with unspoken accusations. This was the silence of exhaustion, the quiet after the fever breaks, when all that's left is the simple, fragile fact of being alive. After a long while, after he had finished his coffee, he finally looked at me. His eyes were clear. The desperation was gone. The arrogance, which had been his armor for so long, had vanished completely. In its place was something new, something tentative, something that might have been mistaken for humility. "Mom," he began, his voice low and steady, stripped of its usual confidence. "I know I don't deserve it. I've spent the whole night thinking, and I know I have no right to ask you for anything. Not after what I did. He took a deep breath, gathering himself. But, is there a place for me here? I can sweep the floors? I can learn to chop wood. I'll do anything. I don't know where else to go. I don't know who I am without all of that. He gestured vaguely. A motion that encompassed a whole life that was now gone. There it was. The question. The one I had been waiting for all night. Turning it over and over in my mind, like a smooth, cold stone from the river. The one that would decide everything. 8 years ago. My answer would have been an immediate, tearful yes. A mother's instinct is a powerful, primal thing. It is to gather your broken child in your arms, to soothe the hurt, to promise that you will make it all better. But I was not that woman anymore. That woman had been left behind in a cold, empty house in the city. The mountain had taught me a different kind of love, a tougher kind. The kind that knows a forest fire is necessary for new growth. The kind that knows a broken bone must be set properly if it is ever to heal strong. I didn't answer him right away. I stood up from the table, the worn wood smooth beneath my palm. Come, I said. Walk with me. He followed me without question, out onto the porch. The air was so cold it felt sharp and clean in my lungs. A shock to the system. We stood side by side, our breath pluming in the still morning air. Looking out at the vast, silent expanse of the mountains, they were ancient, solid. They had seen countless storms come and go, had watched empires rise and fall in the valleys below. Our small lives, our heartbreaks and betrayals, were just a blink of an eye to them. Their silent presence gave me strength. I looked at my son, at the man standing beside me, and I knew what I had to do. Not for him, not even for me, but for the truth, for the honest, unyielding truth of what this place and this new life had taught me. This place, Matthew, I said, my voice as quiet as the landscape before us, was built on honesty and hard work. It was built on your father's dream, and now it is my reality. It is a sanctuary. Matthew, not a hiding place. I turned to look at him fully. My gaze level. I needed him to see the truth in my eyes, to understand that these were not just words. They were the law of this new land I inhabited. You cannot stay here to run away from your life. I continued. The mess you made down there in the city, it's yours. You created it. You cannot outrun it. It will follow you. No matter how high you climb, it will be a ghost that sits at your table and sleeps in your bed. You can only stay here if you are ready to build a new one. And you cannot build anything new on a rotten foundation. He flinched at the word rotten, but he didn't look away. He listened. For the first time since he was a small boy, he truly listened to his mother. I will not give you money, I said, my voice firm, but not unkind. That part of our lives is over, and I will not give you a place to hide from the world or from yourself, but I will give you a chance. The same chance this mountain gave me the chance to start over, with nothing but your own 2 hands. I laid out my terms. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. To look at my broken son, my only child, and offer him a difficult path instead of an easy comfort. It felt like pushing a fledgling out of the nest. He would either fly, or he would fall. You will go back, I told him, my words clear and deliberate in the cold air. You will drive back down this mountain. You will call a lawyer. You will face what you owe. Every last penny. You will have the conversation you need to have with Hannah. Not as a husband trying to win her back, but as the father of her children, a man taking responsibility. You will take every ounce of your failure and you will own it. You will not blame the market, or your partners, or your wife. You will own your choices. His face was pale, his jaw tight, but he held my gaze. The path back here is not a drive up the mountain, Matthew. It's a journey through your own wreckage. You must walk it alone. When you are done, truly done, when you have nothing left to hide from, then the door to the workshop will be open. Samuel can always use an apprentice, but you will start at the beginning. You will sweep the floors. You will learn the names of the trees. You will earn your place here, not as my son, but as a man who is ready to work. I had said my piece. The choice was his. He could take the easy way out, get in his car and disappear, try to start over somewhere else on another lie. Or he could take the hard road back, the long, painful road to himself. He stood there for a long time, the silence stretching between us once more. The sun was fully up now, its light bright and unforgiving on the snow. There were no more shadows to hide in. He looked down at his own hands, the smooth, soft hands of a man who dealt in abstractions. And then he looked back up at the mountains, at their solid, unyielding reality. Finally, he nodded. A single, slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of surrender, but also of resolve. "Okay, Mom," he whispered. His voice was thick with emotion, but it was clear. It was the sound of a promise. "Okay." The Unmended bridge. He left an hour later. I stood on the porch, my arms wrapped around myself, not for warmth, but as if to hold this new, quiet self together. I watched his car snake its way down the winding dirt road. A dark, unfamiliar shape against the bright, clean snow. It grew smaller and smaller, a piece of a world I no longer belonged to, until it disappeared behind the first stand of old-growth hemlock trees. I stood there for a long time after the sound of the engine had faded, leaving only the whisper of the wind in the high branches. It was a lonely sound, but it was not my own loneliness I heard in it anymore. I did not cry. The time for those kinds of tears, the hot tears of betrayal and the bitter tears of grief, was long past. What I felt instead was a quiet, profound stillness settling in my bone, a sense of release, like a long winter finally giving way to the thaw. It was done. I don't know if he will come back. I truly don't. The path I set before him is a hard one, harder than any mountain trail. It is a path that requires you to look at the wreckage of your own life without blaming the storm. It requires you to pick through the pieces, to acknowledge the rot and the rust, and to salvage what little is true. It is a path that many people, not just Matthew, are afraid to walk. It is easier to run. It is easier to find a new town, a new story, a new person to believe your lies. It is easier to build a new life on old, rotten foundations than it is to tear everything down to the bare earth and start again with nothing but the truth and your own two hands. But whether he returns or not, his journey is no longer the center of my life. His choices are his own now, knots for him to untangle. My peace is no longer a fragile thing, dependent on his actions or his approval. And that, I have come to realize, is the only true freedom a parent can ever find. In the city, my life was a reflection in a series of mirrors. I was Richard's wife, a role I loved, but a role nonetheless. I was Matthew's mother, a title that became my entire identity. My days were measured by their needs, my happiness defined by their comfort. When they were gone, one by death, one by his own choice, I looked in the mirror and felt I was nothing. Just an empty space where a person used to be. The mountain taught me otherwise. It doesn't need a mirror. It simply is. It taught me that a tree is still a tree, even if no one is there to see it. Its worth is in its deep roots, in the unseen strength that holds it fast during the storm, in the quiet, persistent way it reaches for the sun. I learned that a mother's greatest gift is not endless sacrifice. That is a myth we tell ourselves, a story that can poison both the giver and the receiver. The greatest gift is knowing when to let go, not just of your children as they grow, but of the role you play for them. We pour ourselves into them like water into a cup, hoping to fill them up. But if we are not careful, we pour until we are empty. A dry vessel, you must, at some point, find the courage to save yourself, to fill your own cup first. Only then can you show them what it truly means to be whole. A mother who is whole is a beacon they can navigate by, not just an anchor they are tied to. And my son, I hope, on his long drive down the mountain, that he learned something too. I hope he learned that a parent's love is not a stone foundation you can endlessly take from without ever putting anything back. It is not a thing you can mortgage and sell. It is a garden, and if you do not tend to it with respect and honesty, if you do not water it with your time and your truth, it will not die. It will simply grow wild. The paths will become overgrown with weeds of resentment and neglect. The blossoms will turn to thorns, and one day, you may find you no longer recognize the way back in. The garden will still be there. A untamed piece of what once was. But it will no longer be a place you can call home. Perhaps the secret of this cabin, the secret he froze at, is not about the success of a small business or the failure of a big one. Those are just stories we tell about money. The real story is about connection. We live in a world that teaches us to build empires, but not communities. A world that teaches us to value net worth, but not self-worth. We chase things that shine, things that are cold and hard like polished steel, and we forget about the things that warm us. Matthew built an empire of numbers on a screen, and it left him shivering in the cold. With Richard's old journals, built a community of warm hands and shared meals, and it keeps me warm through the longest winters. The bridge between my son and me may never be what it once was. It can't be. That bridge was built on a child's innocent need and a mother's unquestioning duty. We are not those people anymore. Some things, once broken, don't mend back the same. The crack remains, a silver scar that tells a story. But here, on this mountain, I have learned you don't always need to fix the old bridge. Sometimes, the wisest thing to do is to let it stand as a monument to what was, and then turn your attention elsewhere. You learn to build new ones. Bridges built on the quiet respect between two adults. Bridges built between friends who become the family you choose. And the most important bridge of all, the one you build between your own two hands, connecting you back to the strength and purpose within yourself. The sun is beginning to set now. It is painting the snow on the western peaks in the most extraordinary colors, deep rose and pale lavender. Colors so beautiful, they almost hurt to look at. Soon, Samuel will be by with some wood he has split, and Alara will bring a new loaf of her sourdough bread. We're planting the spring garden tonight. Looking through seed catalogs and dreaming of tomatoes and basil, there is new life to think about. There are seeds to order. There is a future to tend to. I sit here, on my porch, with a warm mug of chamomile tea in my hands. The air is cold and sharp, but the fire inside is lit and burning steady. I am not waiting for a car to come back up the road. I am not listening for a footstep on the path. I am just here. I am not lonely. I am home. And so, the story of Florence Cole and the secret of her cabin comes to a close. What did you think of Florence's final choice? Would you have done anything differently in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly read every single one. If this story made you feel something, or made you think, please don't forget to leave a like. Share it with someone you believe it will touch. And subscribe to the channel Deepu Cater Story so you won't miss the next mystery we uncover. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story, and who knows, maybe next time, the story will be about you.